So there we go. So we've got recording on. Thanks to Shakirah Akinwale for agreeing to speak on this topic. So this November HAILIE session is about putting tenants at the heart of what we're doing with AI in housing, because this is clearly crucial, not just to doing the right thing, but to doing it right as well. So we've got to be baking this in a really, really deep way. Shakirah is going to do a talk to start us off and to prime some of our thinking around that, and she'll introduce herself a little bit as part of that. And then we'll go into breakout groups where we'll then think of some actions that we can be taking away to make sure that we're actually living that and that this isn't just a talking shop. Once again, just a quick reminder, there's no sales here. This is not a sales environment. This is about making it better for tenants. So yeah, Shakirah, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I guess I'll hopefully get to know you all sort of as we progress through the call. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Guy. My name is Shakirah Akinwale, and I guess I wear a few hats, but I think for what's relevant today is I've been a social resident for pretty much most of my life, and I'm also a built environment expert that ended up not necessarily focusing much on, let's say I studied architecture and sustainable building design and engineering, but I ended up being the techie in a lot of the organizations that I worked in. And that sort of ranged from personal hacks to improve productivity, all the way through to sort of larger, I guess, digital transformations, all of which really people and culture are always at the heart of. So I'll share my screen. I do have a couple of slides. You'll see that okay? Perfect. So I probably won't kind of read on what is on the slides exactly, but I'm using it more as a prompt. If anyone has any questions as I go through, please feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can leave that for later on. So I kind of operate a few areas. So I work with Dash AI, so that's Peter Lino. I also work with DataClan, who you may not have heard of. And we work quite closely with a lot of large housing associations and councils and asset managers in general. And my own sort of small consultancy, Techie, ironically named, so as a lot of it started from just helping people get the most out of technology, essentially, which started also from trying to extract as much as they can from data. So one of the things that I often sort of start with, I guess, in a more resident facing or general kind of facing context, I tend to sort of remind people that technology itself is stupid, and it pretty much works based on our instructions and how it exploits the data that it is given, but all of which needs to be driven by purpose, really. And if we or people aren't at the core of that purpose, then a lot of it ends up being futile or a waste of time. So in our context here, our main culture and our main sort of people are the clients, the consumers, the customers, and that's very much the tenants and residents. And many a time they're excluded from that conversation. We don't often see ourselves as data, but we are data and we are represented with data, and not necessarily always either in an accurate way or in a way that captures, you know, I guess our sort of full human experience, perspectives, desires and preferences. And that ideally is actually where the strength of AI should come in. So meaningful engagement is, I think, a hot topic here in a sense that there are various levels of effort to engage and involve residents and tenants, but a lot of the time it tends to be quite superficial. And a lot of the time, I would say, it often sort of springs about from a particular problem as opposed to holistically carrying along residents and tenants right from the beginning and all the way through to the end. So the idea of co-design and what that really means, I think is really important. I'd also say the idea of collaboration in general, we speak a lot about collaboration, but do we really know how to actually do that and facilitate it and understand whether or not it's been a success for all of those that have been involved in such a collaboration? So prioritizing tenants' well-being as a foundation for innovation should be core to anything that we are doing, especially where it concerns buildings. Another thing I often say is, we forget why we build buildings, and that was particularly true sort of after Grenfell, in my opinion. So again, we essentially represent data points to which, as organizations, you tend to sort of plug in various places to try and either aid a decision or provide a particular outcome. People don't see themselves as data points. They just want to be able to be safe, trust essentially in the process and the outcomes, and obviously have dignity, especially in the context, again, of social housing, but in housing in general. So again, placing tenants at the heart of that is, I would say, an absolute prerequisite. But again, a lot of the time we tend to see tenants, ourselves, I am one of them, as a problem sometimes. Again, we may not say the things that you're expecting to say, expecting to hear, or the things that you hear may not fit nicely within the plans or the intentions or the vision that you might have. And that friction, I think, creates some level of discomfort. So I'd like to, I guess, go through a few, I think sort of 4 core principles here. A lot of them are, to an extent, also mirrored in sort of AI regulations. But again, with technology and everything AI, we have to start with data. And understanding what data we have, the quality of it, why we have collected it, is very important as a starting point. But again, I think there needs to be even a feedback loop right at the beginning to almost kind of confirm that the data that has been gathered is actually accurate and represents at least as close to those, like the current time, because again, things change, but not necessarily, the data sort of tends to stay quite static. So just being able to actually almost refine and change that as we improve our knowledge of who it is that are using our buildings, again, the residents and tenants. We need to be able to, again, have clear, I'll say, auditing processes, again, that are able to involve and enable residents to be involved in that process. And I actually cite an example from one of my resident engagements. We had, we've had quite a few different efforts to involve the resident group in some of the sort of digital passports, some of the platforms that are being developed. I won't name the name of my housing association. There may be some people here from there, no shade. And I remember quite a few times, quite distinctly, there was this older resident who has pretty much been in statistics for sort of most of everyone else's lives sort of duration. And still, I noticed at least on 3 occasions, her ideas were just immediately shut down. And there was almost this blocker of, she's older, so she's not necessarily that digitally savvy. Whereas there was almost this weird sort of, I guess, imbalance where they were sort of looking at not even necessarily the youngers of the residents to sort of be able to answer that, because actually there weren't many younger representatives from the resident pool that joined these sort of, resident meetings. And I guess with that is just a reflection to say that sometimes we don't know who is within our residents pool and what we can actually learn from them. And also, I would say, how you create those groups, those sessions that, again, that enable those co-designs and, I guess, allow residents to feel safe to share their ideas, whether they're experts or not, is highly important. Because again, we don't necessarily talk about the benefits of technology in technical terms. We really need to put it in the context of reality, pragmatic, like full practical scenarios and situations that people can actually relate to, so that they can understand the benefits and the reason why perhaps, you might be seeking this information from them again, for that matter. Which brings me again to this scenario, in a sense of sometimes we just collect information for the sake of it, but we don't necessarily provide enough insight and transparency with regards to how we intend to actually use it and how that then benefits residents and tenants along the way. The next principle, which again, they all sort of connect in together. I don't know if you've come across Sherry Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation, but that's what's represented here on this side. And this is just to kind of reflect the sort of stages and levels of engagement, and essentially sharing of power. A lot of the time, things sort of stay at most probably at this kind of level. So consultation, which feels quite, you know, like placation for a lot of people. I definitely say I'm kind of very much in that category where there's almost this scenario of, I have a voice when I come in as a sort of consultant. So when I'm wearing perhaps my architecture hat or my sustainable building hat, or as a project manager or QS, but as a resident, my voice is pretty much reduced to just, oh, you're a resident. They don't obviously explicitly say, oh, you're a resident, but there are ways in which, by just having certain meetings and keeping it in a particular silo, the information doesn't trickle to, let's say, the right departments within an organization. So transparency with regards to, again, how you actually intend to use some of this information and the benefits of it throughout the process is highly important to demonstrate that sort of sharing of power. So residents actually being able to inform some of the decisions in terms of, again, what is that final product? How will we actually use it? And again, how does that potentially help some of the more frontline staff members and tradespeople who we probably more engage with rather than some of the managers and senior people who do make a lot of these decisions without necessarily consulting us. Having, again, these metrics to an extent driven by residents and tenants to really help understand and measure what are, again, the benefits and what aspects do we need to keep ourselves accountable to, again, residents and tenants towards, are all things that, again, should be captured within the, I guess, consultations, but co-design real element that we hopefully want to engage them with. And that will allow not only for residents and tenants to rebuild the trust at various levels, again, that they've lost in, you know, their landlords, and again, depending on what they're called, whether they're sort of neighborhood housing leads or housing managers, which then in turn allows them to trust the technology or the solutions that are then being put in front of them. So, you know, when a landlord turns around and says, you know, we're digital first, it's not just because they have a nice fancy website that doesn't actually do anything, or they have, you know, a really nice fancy AI chatbot that actually causes more frustration than it does provide any real solutions. Ideally, you want to be in scenarios where, again, you understand, let's say, the extent to which maybe, you know, 30% of your tenants and residents prefer in-person or sort of one-to-one interaction, but maybe 70% don't mind speaking with, you know, an AI, you know, human being, so to speak, if it means that their information or they will be heard sooner and at least some kind of action would be well, yeah, something would be actioned off the back of that. And what that then also does, it provides some level of flexibility for the landlord or the organization to then more personalize and tailor the service that they're providing their tenants, again, and residents. And that, again, speaks to the demonstrable value that you can then provide, which then you can really measure the impact against the needs of those tenants and residents. And again, how that will then inform things like, you know, regeneration plans or retrofits or, you know, so on and so forth. That was like the second principle. Third one, again, mentioned quite a few times about co-design, and again, repeating, I guess, with regards to the ladder of citizen participation. Genuine co-design is very different from just saying, oh yeah, let's co-design. Tenants should absolutely influence design and what the priorities are of any solution that, you know, will either be in front of them that they're expected to use, or that staff will be using that affects, again, the level of service and interaction that they'll be having with their tenants. So there's a lot of, I would say, business analyst and product sort of development tools that could really be utilized here that really aren't. You know, focus groups, a huge one. Focus groups don't need to happen when there is already a product. They can happen right from the beginning. And you can mix them up as well, again, by understanding who your tenants are and perhaps their preferences for how they want to have that. They could be online, they could be hybrid, they could be organized by having or recruiting champions from within the organization, so the residents sort of organization, so the, you know, the resident groups, various community groups that they tend to sort of interact with, actually nominating and empowering someone within those groups to lead those. So again, it doesn't feel as though things are being done to them, but they're actually part of essentially the journey. Mapping the journey. So journey maps are so powerful because, again, pictures tell 1,000 words, and we don't use them enough. We tend to even, I've had scenarios where my landlord, again, through perhaps, some good intentions, will send a load of stuff, I would say, and I'm quite technical, so I don't mind sort of wading through certain documentation and large bits of just like white papers and write-ups, but that's not actually inclusive. That's not necessarily the best way that people will be able to actually understand what is going on, and that has nothing to do with necessarily their technical acumen or anything like that. It's just, how do we make this easier for all parties to understand, because that ideally is the whole point. Otherwise, we're already creating a barrier right from the onset. So yeah, increasing and ensuring we actually close those feedback loops as well. So there's, again, no point engaging or saying we're co-designing with ourselves, so tenants and residents, but not ever coming back and saying, right, this is what we've learned from you, this is what we've implemented, these are potentially the things that we see that may be possibly going wrong. What do you think, and how can we improve and change that, again, as we proceed? And on that same note, I think within this as well, testing. So I think there's a lot of user acceptance testing that happens without actual users, which is really ironic and strange. And increasingly now, ironically, with AI, I've seen quite a lot of offerings where we have AI bots essentially testing on behalf of real people. And then I sort of question, okay, well, how have those AI bots been trained? Has a human being actually been sort of emulated here? Or is it just the case of it's just almost kind of swarming a website? There's only to a certain extent that it can really emulate a human being's behavior in the various ways a consumer might use or abuse a product or a solution. The various, let's say, cultural nuances that come into play as well that need to be considered. How inclusive certain user interfaces or experiences can either cut off certain residents or attract them, make it feel like this is actually for me, or it can make it feel like, no, actually this is something that is making my life a bit harder. Let me go back to what I know and constantly sort of pick up the phone, which again may or may not be a bad thing, but very important, again, to really get to know who your residents are to really guide those outcomes. Which brings me to this one. So outcomes over technology. So again, I think when it comes to, I would say, procuring solutions, services, particularly from an organization standpoint, there tends to be a lot of focus on what the technology is, as opposed to what outcome it needs to be able to deliver. And again, outcome speaks to value and value for all of the stakeholders, again, involved. And to an extent, you have to sort of prioritize, I guess, the value for each of those stakeholders. So just because, there is a senior sponsor who might be driven by, I don't know, perhaps a market need or the investor or a particular regulation, that's all well and good. But if we haven't done the same for instance, middle management or the frontline people, and then the residents and tenants, then you don't have a full picture in terms of what the outcome actually needs to be and which ones matter. And then I guess how you measure, things like satisfaction. So I guess by understanding, I'll say, core outcomes, which for residents, and I would say frontline staff in particular, satisfaction, feeling empowered towards what the outcomes are, and rebuilding and retaining trust are all very important and vital, if not, to really understand, I guess, the success of any AI that is being particularly deployed. Let's even just go a bit earlier than that. Any technology, any solution, product, service that is being put in front of tenants and, again, frontliners. I tend to sort of bring in frontliners in the picture a lot because residents and frontline staff tend to actually face very similar challenges. But again, there's a lot of barriers and walls kind of in the way to that dialogue to understand actually how do we potentially come together to find the solutions, for us. So I was going to go through a short example, which was just with regards to a particular product, but I guess I'll kind of come back around to that. So these are some practical steps that I believe we can all take, regardless of our sort of, I guess, role, whether it's, you know, a senior role or a bit more, you know, front facing. And that is to really take pains to understand the tenant, what their actual challenges, desires, and pains are. And again, I'll flip that and sort of say that's absolutely the same again for frontliners. Bring together cross-functional teams. Again, organizational structures can lend itself very to, you know, a lot of silos, a lot of departments and teams not actually speaking to each other or themselves. So can you imagine what that is then like for, you know, a resident? So you might have a resident engagement, which then only reaches one particular team, but it doesn't get anywhere near those who will actually be building the solution. Assess your, you know, your data readiness or maturity. There are various tools for this. I did know we said we aren't selling. That said, data can have a DMMA, so data maturity assessment, which is also really useful as well for that. And obviously have quite a few different, I would say, solutions or tool kits that you could potentially use for that. Piloting and prototyping, again, as part of that co-design journey is, again, very important. I've touched upon sort of UAT, so user acceptance testing, but it's kind of, it's more than that. It's really having almost a set period in which we can use and try this thing, break it even almost, and see whether it works or not, instead of, I guess, you know, putting all our sort of, forgotten the idiom, or all our eggs in the same basket, or just being sort of averse to risk in the sense of not then being able to perhaps pivot based on some of the feedback that we might gain from, you know, such a sort of piloting program. And again, that fits very much into maintaining feedback loops. How you go about maintaining those feedback loops, again, are very important. And I think very much speaks to whether or not you understand who your residents are. Because again, some people engage or prefer to engage in particular ways, and ironically, technology can facilitate that, but often enough we don't really do that. Just trying to make sure if I've left anything out on this. So yeah, that's fine. So yeah, this was like a kind of, I guess, example with regards to predictive maintenance. I won't go too much into detail of it, but ideally, you know, this was a key one, I think. So a lot of the time, again, residents, tenants are almost kind of kept at arm's length to an extent, especially I'd say when things are sort of live. So there's been quite a lot of effort with regards to improving maintenance and repairs from a sort of landlord or asset manager perspective, but there hasn't really necessarily been a look into, okay, well, how are residents and tenants measuring that and assessing that, and how do we bring that into the tools that we have? And I mean, I can give you various examples of even just, you know, you want to be able to capture quite accurately at the first time what the repair or issue is. You can very much do that if you have the right, you know, data that the resident can sort of see and understand. Being able to even just track and understand when a repair or maintenance person might be coming out. Did you know I've received texts from my landlord for dates and date changes without ever having been consulted? You know, things like that happening is it might feel quite small, but it again just makes you feel completely disregarded and excluded. All the way through to when they then come in, you know, things like not necessarily having an ID badge. You know, again, that could be something that could be pretty much potentially solved with a solution in that, you know, when, let's say, the tradesperson is close to, or they've been assigned to that role, you know, perhaps the ID is already shared, perhaps temporarily, you know, to the tenant. Or again, it's very easily accessible, if not, you know, physically worn within the tool that the tradesperson might bring there. And then most importantly, I would say, in terms of the kind of feedback, you know, how do you capture, I guess, the success of whether or not that repair or maintenance issue has been resolved, ideally, hopefully that first time, and how satisfied, again, is the tenant, and I would say probably the tradesperson. You know, having these sort of, in my opinion, silly questionnaires where you just have like 3 questions and you can only press A, B, or C as a response is absolutely ridiculous and doesn't tell anyone anything useful to be able to build upon. So yeah, I'll just keep that one a bit short. There's obviously a lot more we can kind of get into that with regards to sort of indicators, but I did want to wrap up. I hadn't kept an eye on the time, but maybe someone has. So I would say potentially in our breakouts, we can consider, for instance, some of these in terms of what we can go out and go do. So how you might go about actually bringing together, you know, the different disparate potential teams within your organizations with a tenant or two, or, again, some of the champions, so that you can figure out how best to bring perhaps representatives from each of these sort of teams or departments together. Commit to a single tenant outcome each of the time. So sort of starting small and building up around that. So constantly iterating, being more agile. Definitely try and create, a co-design session if you have not already. And really and truly, I think, understand or assess from those tenants' perspective what is working from them and what isn't, as opposed to constantly, I think, prescribing what that is for them. And again, include tenants and residents in those success metrics and sort of KPIs that are being created or designed to measure success, value, impact, and outcomes. And just make sure that AI is actually, again, technology, data, is serving real needs. Again, just to run through, these are the key messages. Prioritize your customers, consumers. I think just from a business perspective, that should always be the case. But again, in our industry, for some reason, we often forget that residents and tenants are part of that. AI must serve people and not processes. Again, going back to one of the key points at the beginning, technology really is about, people and culture. And data, obviously, which is representing people and culture as best as it can, but will never fully capture the sort of richness of, again, people. Engage them as co-creators. So again, everybody that you see as part of that, people especially that are kind of disengaged, I would say, again, very much renew the effort to engage them and understand what disengaged them in the first place. Constantly build, again, trust or rebuild trust, strengthen trust through transparency and informed consent. Again, that goes back to some of the AI regs, helping people understand what's actually going on slightly under the bonnet. Obviously, part of technology is to sort of reduce complexity, but it's still helpful for people to understand, again, how their information or data is being used, so that, again, they understand how it would benefit them as well. And again, yeah, starting small, stay agile, and constantly measure tenant satisfaction. So yeah, I'll kind of leave you with a couple of questions, probably for the breakout again. How do you engage your tenants from day one, if you aren't already? And if you are, how do you retain that engagement and leverage those tenants that are engaged as almost advocates to bring on board more tenants and resident voices? And what tenant outcomes do you care about most? And I guess, how have you validated them with your tenants? Yeah, I think that's what I'll leave you with, and always happy to connect and collaborate and just have a nice chat, to be quite honest. I have a bit of a project that I'm working on, which I'll probably share, hopefully maybe in a following meeting, called Resident Action Exchange. And part of that, ironically, is to be able to almost create a sort of plugin, particularly for residents, to almost kind of serve as their sort of digital voice. In this whole context of a lot of digital twins, you can probably serve as, like, a tenant's or resident's digital twin that can hopefully speak perhaps in a more technical manner on their behalf. But yeah, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that was helpful. So I'll just...
Thank you very much, Shakirah. Well, that was awesome. Really enjoyed that. Thank you. So if does anybody have any questions that are kind of burning for Shakirah? If you want to, like, raise your hand or just talk, then you're welcome to. Okay, so no burning questions, in which case I suggest we go into the breakout groups, and exactly as Shakirah framed it, let's work on what we can be doing to do this better, something quite concrete. Potentially you might want to think about the kind of collective action we could be doing here to make that co-design happen, like, genuinely right at the design part, not as a sort of late consult or inform right at the end. And I think that was a really good message there. And so Tom Stevenson has been very kindly organizing the breakout groups for us. So take it away when you're ready, Tom.
Yep. So we've got five groups with four or five people in them. We've had a couple of people drop in and out in terms of connection. So those who are showing as disconnected, I'm leaving you in the main call. If you find yourself in the main call with me, then I will plonk you into a group, because we'll know that you are in fact connected. So With that, nothing more to say. Enjoy the breakout groups and see you afterwards. I've put a timer on for 15 minutes, so we'll have 10 minutes or so to sort of regroup at the end. Right, with that, enjoy.
And then we got told. It was like, oh no, we've got to go back.
I know that was great, wasn't it? Like it really.
It was like we needed more time.
I know, but also like we needed more time for Shakirah because she had more stuff to get out of her brain. So it's like, but we do what we can in the time that we have, and I really appreciate all of the time that we're putting into this. So thanks everybody. So do people know which room numbers they were in? Do you remember? So should we go in order? So room 1. Somebody want to play back a bit?
So we had a bit of a sort of introductory chat about who's who, but I guess in terms of the meat of it, Alison had pointed out she'd been at a conference where she had posed the question of the audience, how many of you have asked your tenants what they think of AI? And the answer was 0. So our kind of collective action out of that was talk to your tenants about AI, but don't ask them a vague open-ended question like, what do you think of AI? You need probably think about your use cases and what you might want to use it for, and then go in with a kind of, okay, we're thinking about this. What do you think about us using AI to diagnose your repair or to, you know, review some of our complaints or whatever it might be, and ask them some specific questions about that, because you might then get some useful stuff that might feed into your governance in terms of how you're going to reassure people that you're not going to be spewing their personal data into ChatGPT or whatever in order to analyze their complaints. Slightly flippant, you know what I mean? So that was a kind of the call to action, I suppose, was think about what you might use it for and then go and ask your tenants about it. And you might be able to go on the back of satisfaction surveys for repairs or other things that you're doing in a way, or other methods of doing it in order to, you know, to not make it cost more money, whatever. Yeah.
Brilliant. Great summary. Thanks, Group 1 and Scott. So Group 2.
We didn't decide who was going to speak.
I think you've just volunteered yourself there, Claire.
Okay. So those of you who know me will not be surprised to hear that we talked about purpose. I know, shock. So we sort of went back a little bit, and Stephanie had some great research about people are not speaking to their customers, as we've heard from many people today already. But we went back a little bit further than that, and I, said, why are we using AI, and pulled on what we did last week in Manchester. At CAC, you were in my group, and Joe was there, and we were talking about what is the destination, where are we actually trying to get to? Because I think in analogies, and we talked about a ship. We're taking this ship towards good service, and we're not really sure what good looks like, and until we know what good looks like, we don't know what the best tools to take us there might be. And so it was all about that purpose, your strategic objectives, as your starting point, and they should anchor everything that you do.
Thanks very much for that. And Group 2. So Group 3. Go on, someone from Group 3.
Okay, I'll go. We kind of went down the same route as Claire. We didn't call it the purpose, but we were talking about understanding the customers and the importance of engaging to see what their actual needs are, because housing associations do some really great stuff, but there's like a disengagement with the SLT to the actual people delivering to the customers. So I think it's important to understand, again, the why, understanding who your customers are, the demographics, and just seeing what they actually need before we do anything with AI or any data, and then looking at what's going to benefit the customers and then what's going to be an internal benefit using like AI or data, just like separating them out and then talking more to the residents to see how we split those out.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Aklak. And group 3. So group 4, I was in that one, but Diane, do you want to? No. Okay, so I'll do it. So we we spoke a lot about the tenant, obviously, but in particular we were thinking about hackathons and we spoke a lot about how we might be able to make sure that people felt valued for contributing to those kind of sessions. And again, it was kind of like about closing the loop. We had quite a lot of discussion about how we would compensate people, like without incurring benefits impact on that. So like doing really good lunches, that sort of thing. We thought that was probably quite a good way of doing it, and making sure it was actually what we were doing was actually useful, and that they would find that part fulfilling as well. So yeah, watch this space. Like there's a decent chance that this group will run a hackathon of some sort. I think that's kind of where this ended up. So was there a group 5?
There was, but they were reallocated. There was only 2 of them, so no.
Cool. Thank you very much, Sean. Right. So that was brilliant. So sort of playing it back, there was a lot about actually talking to tenants today, which is like, yay. Ella, do you have something to contribute?
I just thought, can I ask a question as soon as we don't have a group 5? What is a hackathon? Someone tell me that. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. So what we want to do is bring a lot of different people together with different kind of brains and get them to go and build some stuff very quickly using IT stuff. So the kinds of things, so almost, have you seen our like the TSM dashboard that Tom's done? A little bit. So he made some code, but he actually doesn't know how to code. So we kind of vibe coded this, and we did it in initially we did that in quite a short period of time. So that's kind of like a hackathon. So people will have different ideas of things that they want to make better that will be customer focused, and then we'll just crack on and see how far we can get with it. And it will be through a bit of an AI lens, so it won't be necessarily like solving the problem in a transformational way, but it will be about showing some of the art of the possible with AI to support some of these things that will be. But so Shakira's nodding. She's so I'm going to take that as positive feedback. But if you're interested in getting involved in organising this, like drop me a note, because it will happen.
Guys, it's just worth noting where the term hackathon comes from, because the word hack is emotive, isn't it? It came out of the technology, out of ethical hacking and organizations wanting to understand the vulnerabilities in their systems. So, by organizations like Microsoft, for example, so they would set time limit and say in 48 hours, break our system. And then this now loads of organizations in almost every industry do it at some level. It's a way of improving, yeah.
This wouldn't be the first time it's happened in housing. I think DIN have tried to run a couple as well. But yeah, cool. So, but that's obviously inviting tenants to that is key, because they're the customer. You normally do that. Okay, cool. So thank you very much, everybody. We have a next session in December. Again, it's sort of first Friday, 11 o'clock. It's about, yeah, there's 2 parts to it. So it's on the mailer if you're on that, about who's speaking. So it's a couple of talks. I also just wanted to point out the AI for IT directors guide that we published. So again, sort of closing that feedback loop. So we spoke about making that, and we've made that in collaboration with the IT directors who are our customers. So sort of on Shakira's message, getting customers to build the stuff. And so that, yeah, that's available on the website. Creative Commons license, so you can go and just go nuts with it. So hopefully, yeah, we'll continue with this good work. And thank you very much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it.